A shadow of conflict looms over the Middle East as tensions between Iran and Israel threaten to escalate into a full-blown regional crisis. Iran has sent secret, menacing warnings to the Arab Gulf states, cautioning them to stay away from any Israeli military actions or risk becoming the next target. Tehran's aggressive rhetoric is pushing Gulf nations, longtime U.S. allies, into an uncomfortable position where their delicate relationships with Israel and the U.S. could be jeopardized. But why is Iran making such bold threats? What are the stakes for Israel, Iran, and the Arab world? And how could this looming conflict reshape alliances in the Middle East? Let's break it down. Chapter 1. The root of the conflict. The conflict between Iran and Israel dates back decades, rooted in ideological, geopolitical, and military tensions. At the heart of the issue lies Israel's existence, which Iran has never recognized. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran has positioned itself as a vocal critic of Israel, opposing its policies and backing militant groups such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, which are dedicated to resisting Israel. In recent years, Iran's growing influence in the region, particularly through its involvement in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen, has alarmed Israel. Tehran's advancing nuclear program has also been a source of tension, with Israel fearing that Iran might use nuclear weapons against it or its allies. Consequently, Israel has long considered Iran its primary adversary in the region. For Israel, a nuclear-armed Iran is an existential threat, and it has repeatedly warned that it will not allow Tehran to acquire nuclear weapons. Israel has engaged in covert and overt operations to sabotage Iran's nuclear ambitions, including cyber attacks, the assassination of Iranian scientists, and airstrikes on Iranian assets in Syria. The latest flashpoint occurred when Iran fired approximately 180 ballistic missiles at Israel, escalating the conflict and prompting Israeli officials to consider military strikes against Tehran's nuclear facilities. Chapter 2. The Arab world's complex relationship with Israel. The Arab world has historically been united in its opposition to Israel. For decades, the Palestinian cause was the rallying point for Arab unity, and many Arab nations refused to recognize Israel or engage diplomatically. However, the landscape has shifted dramatically in recent years. A growing number of Arab countries, led by the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, have normalized relations with Israel through the Abraham Accords, brokered by the United States in 2020. But why have these Arab nations, once vehemently opposed to Israel, now become its quiet allies? Several factors explain this shift. Firstly, the Arab Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain, view Iran as a far greater threat than Israel. Iran's influence in the region, coupled with its military capabilities and proxies, has alarmed these nations. Tehran's support for Shia militias in Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen has been seen as part of an effort to destabilize Sunni Arab governments and extend Iran's influence across the Middle East. Secondly, the Gulf states share strategic interests with Israel. Both seek to counterbalance Iran's growing power and influence in the region. Israel's military capabilities, especially its advanced intelligence and defense technology, are seen as valuable assets in curbing Tehran's ambitions. Additionally, economic considerations play a role in the rapprochement between Israel and the Arab states. By normalizing relations with Israel, countries like the UAE have gained access to Israeli technology, cybersecurity, and trade opportunities. Tourism, investment, and cooperation in areas like renewable energy and agriculture have blossomed, adding to the personal and national benefits. Chapter 3. Why Gulf states are cautious. Despite their growing ties with Israel, the Arab Gulf states remain cautious when it comes to taking direct action against Iran. Why? Because the consequences of such actions could be devastating for these energy-rich nations. Iran's latest warnings to the Gulf states are a stark reminder of the risks involved. Tehran has threatened to target any Arab country that allows its territory or airspace to be used for attacks on Iran, with particular emphasis on key U.S. allies such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, and Qatar. These nations host significant U.S. military bases and play an important role in U.S. and Israeli defense strategies. But if they facilitate Israeli strikes on Iran, they could find themselves in the crosshairs of Tehran's missiles. Iran's military has significant capabilities, including ballistic missiles that can reach the Gulf states' oil-rich regions and major cities. The energy infrastructure in the Gulf, which includes some of the world's most important oil fields and refineries, is particularly vulnerable. Any attack on these facilities could disrupt global oil supplies, send prices skyrocketing, and destabilize the global economy. Iran has already hinted that it could target oil exports passing through the Strait of Hormuz, a vital maritime choke point. For the Gulf states, these threats are not to be taken lightly. While they might privately support Israel's stance against Iran, they are hesitant to be drawn into a direct military confrontation that could have catastrophic consequences for their own economies and security. Chapter 4. Caught between two powers. This caution explains the Arab Gulf states' delicate balancing act. On the one hand, they oppose Iran's military ambitions and see Tehran as a regional destabilizer. On the other hand, they are reluctant to provoke Iran by openly supporting Israeli military actions, particularly those that could target Iran's nuclear or oil infrastructure. Several Gulf states have communicated to the U.S. that they do not want their airspace or military bases to be used for offensive operations against Iran. While they continue to cooperate on defensive measures, such as sharing intelligence and radar tracking, they are drawing a line when it comes to direct involvement in an Israeli-Iranian conflict. U.S. defense officials have acknowledged these concerns and have said that some regional partners have placed informal limits on how American forces can operate from their territories. This reluctance highlights the complex nature of the Gulf states' relationships with both Israel and Iran. While they see Iran as a threat, they also recognize the power and influence Tehran wields in the region. The Gulf states fear that any miscalculation or escalation could draw them into a war they are not prepared for, with devastating consequences for their national security and economic stability. Chapter 5. A calculated strategy. Iran's warnings to the Arab world are part of a calculated strategy aimed at deterring regional actors from joining forces with Israel. Tehran knows that while Israel might be capable of launching strikes on its own, its chances of success are greater with support from the US and its Arab allies. By threatening retaliation against Arab countries that assist Israel, Iran is attempting to isolate Israel and limit its military options. These threats are not just aimed at the Gulf states, but also at the U.S. military, which has a large presence in the region. American troops and installations in countries like Qatar, the UAE, and Bahrain could become targets if those nations are seen as complicit in an Israeli strike on Iran. This would complicate U.S. military operations in the region, particularly as American forces rely on access to air bases and logistical support from these countries. Iran's warnings have also raised concerns in Washington. The U.S. has been trying to manage the escalating conflict, urging Israel to limit its response to Iranian provocations and attempting to prevent the situation from spiraling into a broader regional war. However, the U.S. remains Israel's closest ally and is committed to ensuring its security. This places Washington in a difficult position as it tries to balance its support for Israel with the need to maintain stability in the Gulf. Chapter 6. The ripple effects of escalation. If the conflict between Israel and Iran continues to escalate, the consequences for the entire Middle East could be profound. A full-scale war between these two powers could drag the Gulf states into the conflict, either directly or indirectly. Oil supplies could be disrupted, economies could suffer, and the political landscape of the region could be reshaped. For the Arab world, particularly the Gulf states, the risks are high. On one side, they face the threat of Iranian retaliation if they support Israeli military actions. On the other side, they risk alienating Israel and the US, key allies in the struggle against Iran's influence in the region. The Gulf states must navigate this dangerous terrain carefully. Their decisions in the coming months will be critical in determining the future of the Middle East. If they choose to side with Israel and the US against Iran, they could face immediate and severe consequences from Tehran. If they remain neutral, they risk losing the support of their Western allies and missing out on the strategic benefits that come with closer ties to Israel. Chapter 7. A dangerous crossroad. The Middle East stands at a dangerous crossroads, where a misstep by any of the key players could ignite a conflict with far-reaching consequences. Iran's chilling warning to the Arab world serves as a stark reminder of the fragile balance of power in the region. While the Arab states may privately support Israel's efforts to contain Iran, their reluctance to openly back military action against Tehran speaks volumes about the risks involved. For Israel, this is about survival. Its security is constantly threatened by Iran, and it is determined to halt Tehran's nuclear ambitions. On the other side, Iran seeks to expand its influence and deter any attacks on its regime by keeping the Arab world in check. So, will the Gulf states bow to Iranian pressure or continue quietly supporting Israel? Could these tensions drive the Gulf into a formal military alliance with Israel and the US, sparking a wider regional conflict? And what would happen to global oil markets if the Strait of Hormuz, a critical energy artery, comes under threat? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Before you go, make sure to hit that like button if you found this deep dive insightful. Subscribe to our channel to stay updated on the latest in global economics and geopolitics. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'll see you in the next video.